We are here today with Danielle Lin. Thank you, Danielle, for joining us today.
Thank you, Joseph. I enjoy joining all of us today.
What we initially planned, what I wanted to do was I wanted to walk around with everyone and record a conversation with Danielle while walking in one of my favorite parks in Toronto, one of my favorite parks in Toronto. And it turns out it's raining, so it looks like we'll be doing it from the car. So, what I wanted to do was talk about the event that we're doing and also aspects on the page. So, if you go into the description, you will see a link to the page where you can register for the event. I would like to talk about some of these aspects on the page to explore what we're going to do at the event and also provide some insights of how Danielle and I work together, as well as I would like to know about your style of facilitating transformation. And you're welcome to as well ask me about my style, and we're going to free flow like that. So this is a free flowing conversation about our style, the event, and what we're going to do on November 23rd. How do you relate to that?
I relate very well. I wanted to ask your style too, so we're on the same page.
All right, fun. So on the page, there are 6 points on the top. Number 1 is anchor into inner awareness. Number 2 is observe core outdated patterns. Number 3 is step into your resonance story. Number 4, wire in the natural you. Then we have transform through group focus and shift your outdated identity. So what does anchor into, number 1, anchor into inner awareness mean to you?
Inner awareness to me, personally, is our core voice, the resonance we are beyond the surface level thought forms, beyond who we imagine ourselves to be. That inner self is our natural emanation when we are in a state of active flow. So some of us will focus on the surface level thoughts, which is fine. This is one way to move. But I find that when we anchor in to our core central eminence, our natural state of being, we tend to have more clarity, not only in the present moment, but across the landscape of our lives. What about you, Joseph? How do you relate to that
I
same
relate
point?
to this ideally and from personal experience. I find that as I have been applying what we've been discussing here on this channel, and I've shared my experiences, this journey with me started in 2004 with Think and Grow Rich. As over the years, I have been applying this. I go through what is called, what I refer to as mind purification. Mind purification is releasing identification to particular beliefs that I have associated with myself, which we can call limiting beliefs, that generate thoughts of doubt, uncertainty, confusion. Sometimes I refer to it as illusions of separation, not from the premise of love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. This generates mental chatter in my mind and seems to cloud out this inner voice that speaks from my sure foundation. So over the years, through mind purification, I experience more flow, and also I can tune into this intuition to discern in relation to appearances and choose in accordance with my true nature a lot easier than ever before. And this seems to be increasing more so as well. How do you relate to that?
I relate very well. I love how you pointed up things like the subconscious beliefs or the pattern, things that the way I heard it are not self. And when we're attuning to our resonant inner voice, that is listening to the self that actually guides us in intuitive, flow based ways.
Yes, I find that this voice always appears to guide me to where my flow is. This is true in relation to business, personal relationships, day-to-day life. A practical example would be this conversation here. Initially, we said, let's do this while I walk and you would be in your forest. Yet it actually worked out in an ideal way. Now, we could always do another conversation that is with you walking in your forest, me walking at my favorite park. Yet I felt that it was also very intuitive to have this conversation here. So let's say if I was biased to it had to be there in order for me to be happy, then I would force myself to, let's say, cancel this or do it at another time. But I feel that as we're having this conversation, everything is flowing here, and I feel very comfortable where I am here. So the intuition appeared to go to this particular part here and park here and have this conversation with you. And as I'm actually looking at the environment right now, I'm actually noticing that I'm experiencing even more clear insights and perspectives that are being articulated here. And also another interesting point in relation to this particular parking spot, which goes to show the precision of intuition, is a number of years ago when everything was locked down in Toronto, I used to stay up north, and that's where I learned how to snowboard. And in the summer, while I was staying north as well, I would drive down here and I would park here and I would longboard in this particular area here because this is called the Bentway in Toronto. And there's an area where even if it's raining, you could longboard because it's dry. It's underneath the highway. And in the winter, people go ice skating there. And in the summer, they inline skate, roller skate. So this spot is very symbolic for me to have inner conversations, this exact parking spot. So that is what I mean. That's a practical example of this.
Excellent. You know, what's so interesting is as you were initially speaking, I felt an inquiry arise within me saying, I'd be really interested in an example story that Joseph might have for flow-based, for applying in a flow-based way in a very practical way. And then you shared immediately, which to me is also another symptom of being in the flow, being as I am, because the inquiry or the quest with the reality around us, living and moving from that inner voice, the inquiry and the answer, in my experience, seem to appear almost simultaneously, whether it's an actual question asked or whether it's an inspiration, idea, insight, and then the opportunity to take a current resonant step with that inspiration appears in the moment. I'm curious how you experience that.
I relate to that. I found that even you and I had that experience. Remember that time when we were going to record for Flow-Based Prosperity at your place? So I actually, as everyone knows who has watched the video that we released on your channel as well as mine, I flew down to your place to engage in that conversation with you in the forest. And then one of the things that I was doing was I was running the Flow-Based Prosperity session. And it turns out that the internet went down. It normally doesn't go down in your place, but it went down. So remain in the flow. And we happened to end up in this parking lot where the internet connection on my phone was perfect. And so we ended up also synchronistically running Flow-Based Prosperity in my rental car at the time. So you were in the passenger seat, I was in the driver's seat, and we're running Flow-Based Prosperity parked in a parking lot. And there was also a lot of insights and perspectives that happened that were symbolic to that story, that as the participants in Flow-Based Prosperity were asking the questions, we were able to relate to that particular story. So I find that this happens naturally more and more so, and this has been increasing in frequency since I made flow a priority in 2017. This kind of everything happening ideally automatically, as I sometimes refer to it, synchronistically and naturally, which has brought me to the realization that this is our natural way of being. So our natural way of being is this way. It's magical, and it's the beliefs that seem to generate illusions of it not being this way. What I mean by that very specifically is that, let's say if I became identified with particular beliefs in relation to environment changing or appearances changing, or let's say your internet going down, that were limiting, I may now unnecessarily try to force and control things and do what I refer to as convoluted behaviors. Yet the optimal thing to do at that time, I found, was to listen to the intuitive guidance, which is what we did. And we both had that intuitive guidance. And I remember it was step by step, all the things, and we can get into the nuances, but we did a step by step, and it was flow based. We were joking in the car, having fun. We also had a wonderful drive down, and there was a beautiful view. We ended up in this parking lot, and I can't remember. It was a church parking lot, right? What the church was called? Do you remember what it was called?
Yes, it's like the Truth Church or the Church of Truth.
Yes. Which is what we were talking about a lot over the days when we were there, that I was releasing in the videos, and flow-based prosperity. So this relates very closely to observing core outdated patterns, because essentially what we're talking about here is listening to intuition thus far allows us to remain in our flow and actually reveals the places to go, what to do, etc. So what I find is that what we're talking about relates very closely to the second point, which is observe core outdated patterns. As we are aware of outdated patterns that appear in mind before identifying with them and choosing not to identify with them, but rather listen to the still small voice, intuition that provides clarity, as we're able to do that, a few things end up happening. And there's many things that happen, but a few things I would like to focus on is, number one, that belief gets released, mind purification. Number two is you make the authentic move. You know what to do. In conversation, for example, you know what to say. And then things flow naturally. You experientially feel it. Do you find that to be the case? How do you relate to that?
I do find that to be the case. Well, linking from the first point, if the first point is about connecting deeply to that inner voice, then it naturally leads in to our ability to be discerning and aware with what does not resonate with our core selves, as I refer to true selves or natural selves. And as you pointed out, it allows us to step into the place of the what I call the observer self. The observer self, who I describe as the curious self, the curious self that has no specific judgment. It's simply the awareness. And so in the awareness with curiosity, we're able to be aware of any patterns, whether they would normally be perceived by ourselves as good or as bad or as neutral. In the observer place, everything is simply as it is. And so therefore, we can not only connect very clearly with the present moment and what we're experiencing, but it allows us to identify the patterns without being identified with the patterns, which I'm sure, as you know, is a key distinction when we are choosing to navigate in a flow-based way. Because flow isn't about ignoring what is going on. It is about being so completely present with it and understanding that whatever's going on is always showing up in the ideal, even when it's a unexpected ideal. And since we're not attached to the way the pattern is showing up, it allows us an opportunity to be a dancer with life instead of someone who is attempting to arm wrestle with life. What do you think of that? The arm wrestling.
I like that. I love that. The dance of life, playfulness, childlikeness, which is one of the things that happens naturally while we're in flow. You may be aware of, I speak about this a lot, divergent thinking and convergent thinking reconciles into what I call lateral being, harmonious being, a reconciliation of divergent and convergent thinking, or divergent and convergent perspectives. What I mean by that is divergence is seeing many different possibilities. So many different life experiences or ways to relate to the appearance there are infinity ways, would you agree, that you could relate to what is happening here? Ideally, we would like to, let's for say an example to business, see the opportunity points or relate to it from the perspective of this is an opportunity. How so? Optimization to our conversation. Oh, this is another way we can do things that can result in a mutually beneficial outcome, because we see it from a perspective that we have never seen before. Divergent perspective. A convergent perspective or convergent thinking is going with well-established solutions. Perhaps we have done a number of things before and it has worked, and it can work here as well, which can be true. Now, while you're in flow, there is what I call fluidity of mind, which then by going within and tapping to intuition, you can choose if it's going to be something that we've done before and that'll work again, or something we've never done before, a new way of looking at it. And then what happens is we remain in our flow. And we also discover new ways of doing things, which are pleasantly surprising. So that's one of the benefits of being in flow. And actually, everything we're talking about here values flow. For a person that's in flow, it facilitates remaining in their flow. And if a person feels restricted or not being in the flow, what we're talking about here brings them back into the flow.
Yes, exactly. Well, what I love about this, we're speaking in a bit about the nuance of flow-based living, because from my perspective, it's a shift from attempting to control life into a place where you realize you're naturally in harmony with thriving in life. And it's only our sometimes temporary surface level thought forms, if we get very engaged with them, we might imagine an idea that the script was meant to, in quotes, flow another way. But that is what I think you refer to as sometimes the confusion thoughts, because they can be fun to play with. There's no blame on these thoughts. When I find when we're in a flow-based way of being, we could even observe ideas like that. It's not about even avoiding those ideas, but I find from my perspective, we no longer, once again, identify with them. They simply become pictures, possibilities in the realm of the imagination. And then as the present moment is playing out, it is revealed what is. And since in flow, you are so completely in the present moment, if those previous thoughts drift away, there's not necessarily a sense of, oh, that should not have been, because we realize immediately what is identical to what is resonant, because it is. And I'm curious how you feel about that, Joseph.
Even when I look right here in this environment, there are many, we could say, sources of inspiration. I could be inspired by that tree. I could be inspired by the truck here. And I could relate that over also to what you're saying. And that could stimulate ideas of what to talk about next. So in any given moment, there are many what appears as sources of inspiration. But really, the sources within, we're relating to it that way. It seems to mirror inspiration. So that is available at any moment. I would actually like to give an example with respect to conversations in personal relationship and business relationships. So in business relationships, we may have what we can call a difficult conversation. Now, that's a label, difficult conversation. Who labels it as a difficult conversation or flow-based conversation? Someone might say, well, it feels like a difficult conversation. It's a difficult topic. Or another person might say, well, that's a flow-based conversation, a flow-based topic. So two people have a different perspective. What we want to encourage more so is that the flow-based way of relating to it allows for more possibilities. One of the reasons why is it releases the rigidity of trying to control, as you mentioned. Now, practically speaking, a person can feel if they're trying to control, if there's tension, or if they're thinking, I'm going to prove this person wrong, or these are the best ways. It can never be any other way. These are some thoughts, or in your body, you feel the tension. In that moment, we can value the space, the silence, the stillness to release without judgment for a moment. It can be done real time during conversations. And then what happens is we may end up listening to the person if they're speaking, or we may end up communicating in a way that we've never done before, or in a way that we have done before, but in a style of communication that is not confronting, not putting the other person down. Very flow-based is a great way of saying it, flow-based conversation. So what then ends up happening is a dialogue, a harmonious dialogue, a conversation from which clarity arises, mastermind conversations. And both individuals end up discovering ways that they have never discovered before, perhaps, or they are able to, without the bias, draw from their reference experience, memories, etc., which is stored in the subconscious mind, via intuition, the solution for the seeming challenge or the problem, or the optimization for the business aspect, for example. And that is a wonderful thing. That's a practical example of the benefit of doing things in a flow-based way. I would like to ask you a question in relation to this. It seems how everything flows synchronistically. By being in flow, that's it. So you and I didn't plan that we're going to go through these points, but it flowed. It actually relates synchronistically now to the next point. Step into your resonance story. Now we're aware that we can choose. We're choosing from our true nature. We are aware of if we are in the flow or not. We are aware of what we think, how we emotionally relate, for example, with people, behaviors, etc. And we know that there is a moment where we can be still, where we cannot identify, as you had mentioned earlier, we identify particular patterns in mind, yet we choose not to identify with them if they don't feel resonant. And we might not know what to identify with next. So you could say identify with our true nature, and which is true identity. Then at that moment, a person has an opportunity to step into their resonance story. Would you say that? How do you relate to that?
I relate to that very well. You know, what's so beautiful is at any given moment, right now, we can step into our most resonant story from here without requiring anything outside of ourselves to pick first. One of the reasons I find that so powerful is sometimes people could choose to temporarily believe that there must be a restrictor for them to be who they truly are. Perhaps they believe they need more time or a certain amount of health or a certain relationship or a certain amount of money. And what I find is in the flow, you could understand that in the present moment where you find yourself, no matter what the outside story appears to be, you're actually in the most resonant spot to connect with everything you truly want to experience in the moment. First, by, as you said, through being the observer, we're observing where we place our focus. And now with curiosity, we can begin to not only address the answer of what truly matters to me right now, because you're now curious, you're not so locked into the thought. But as you get curious in each given moment, you can say, well, what matters to me is to feel at ease. So then perhaps in that moment, you can immediately connect to the knowing that, well, even if there's external circumstances a certain way, because I'm in the flow, really this is the resonant place for me to be. And then relax. And now you have a new opportunity. Well, what feels good now? More relaxed, and I'll relax. Now what feels good? I'm kind of curious. Maybe I'll take a walk and have inspiration. And what I'm describing here is one of the premises that I share is that the field of now, this exact moment, always contains within it a present magical step that connects you to your most synchronous next now. And to really understand that means there's no place that you can be in your life where you are actually disconnected from embodying your most delightful experience. You can simply, in any given moment, realize, oh, even if my story appears to have been this way up until this moment, here is a new now. Now what to choose? New moment. And I share that these iterative ways of moving, meaning consistent in each moment as we choose, no matter what has happened, as we consistently choose to meet the moment with curiosity, with a sense of willingness, with a sense of being as I am, without appearing to force or do anything at all. We find ourselves in consistently more and more and more resonant moments as it relates to that true inner self that we described in the first step. What do you think about that, Joseph?
This reminds me a lot of mind purification. The way I relate to it is essentially we return back to our childlike way of being. I believe that we authentically know what we desire in life. We authentically desire to be the way we desire to be. And perhaps through particular beliefs formed in mind, which we can call limiting or restrictive, the individual seems to subconsciously not allow themselves to be the way they truly desire to be, which could play out as a lot of stories that are not the resonant story. Now, no shame and condemnation. Through what we're talking about here, we can be aware of this playing out and choose to not identify with those patterns. As we continuously do this, because I see it as a practice, as mentioned, I've been doing this since 2004, what happens is you may notice that some of the desires that you had as a child start to appear, start to be expressed. For example, I would say things, I would say it very passionately. I'd be excited about something, and I'd talk about it. I tend to do it a lot now in the channel. I have a space to do it. So we're doing it here, we're doing it at the event, we're doing it through the videos, etc. I've been doing this for years now. A belief was formed in mine in the earlier stages that that's wrong. I should not do that. And I believed that that was true. I said, I can't express myself because if I express myself, then people won't accept me the way that I am. They won't appreciate it. So over the course of my life, this resulted in a lot of suppressing and repressing desire emotions because I genuinely felt like talking about certain things. Yet there was this thoughts that would appear in mind that said, you shouldn't do it. People will make fun of you. People won't accept you. That's inappropriate. Even though if we have a conversation about it, we'll see clearly it's not inappropriate. For whatever the reasons, I would identify with that. Now, through this practice, what we're talking about here, I became aware of those thoughts. And I said, well, that doesn't feel authentic. That doesn't feel natural. So I didn't identify with them. And then what I found was I automatically, naturally, in a flow-based way, do the things that I genuinely desire to do. In this regard, it was communicate particular messages. It would play out in public speaking. It would play out in relationships. It would play out in making videos. It would play out in conversations like this. It ended up playing out in facilitating workshops. Since 2010, for a number of years, I was teaching speed reading workshops, from which many thousands of people benefited greatly from it. That was a natural result of releasing identification to those untrue beliefs. If I didn't do it, I wouldn't have allowed myself to teach those workshops. And then those people wouldn't have benefited greatly from my style of teaching, which is what they were looking for. There was a number of different speed reading instructors, yet they were looking to learn it this way that I was teaching it. And so what ended up happening was I ended up doing it. And not only did I end up doing it, and everyone benefited greatly from it. I also benefited greatly. It was a great business deal. And Paul, the founder of Iris Reading, have a wonderful relationship over the years. We've done a number of things together. But I also noticed that we could say I felt alive. I felt childlike again. So that's what I mean by it feels like this is a journey of returning back to our childlike way of being, which is authentic, true, innocent, curious. How do you relate to that?
I relate to that very well. And, interestingly enough, when I got the image of a flow-based being, what I sometimes refer to as the childlike stage. So we have the child who has the curiosity but needing of the wisdom, and then the adult would theoretically have experience in which it develops a wisdom. But then the childlike stage has both the wisdom and the embodiment of the experience, however, continues to have an open heart with curiosity rather than feeling disconnected from either joy or perceived pain. The childlike stage really just embraces the experience as a whole, and therefore nothing is actually closed off to the person in flow. And the distinction I generally share with people is where some can sometimes fall into a mental loop with flow-based living is around the place of feeling that they must effort to be in flow. In other words, when there's a attachment and expectation to how flow looks, and when something appears to be out of flow, they wonder what they are quote unquote doing wrong. Whereas the subtle distinction and shift would be, I am in flow. I am flow. Therefore, all that is appearing is in my deepest, most resonant adherence to flow. And when the mind is curious about how this contributes to flow, it is no longer judging how something is or is not flow because it is already known to be flow. So in that way, no matter what appears in the present moment, it inherently contributes to flow. And so since the energy isn't in resistance to what is, an enormous amount of personal power is suddenly available to those who are playing. There might be a sense of humor or playfulness, or it creates wonderful stories, such as the story that you and I had about being in flow at the forest with the recording experience. And as such, it almost becomes a game and an adventure because nothing is where there's no fear, so to speak, of things going away other than expected. There's almost a treasure hunt quality I find to life where we may move forward with here's how we imagine the ideal would move forward, but then what appears gets to be ideal anyway, and we get to uncover the treasure of the moment through the appreciation, the experience, and interaction with it. How do you feel about that?
This reminds me of Matthew 10:16 in the Bible. Behold, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore be shrewd as snakes, or shrewd as serpents, and innocent as doves. So the child is born into the world innocent as a dove, with a desire to be the way they are. They may form particular beliefs, and then at a particular point, which let's say the beliefs are not helpful, such as the example given earlier from my personal experience, and I would love to explore some of yours as well. Then they begin to discern. So shrewd as serpents means discern. Does this feel resonant or not? So then what happens is this harmonious relationship. It's the living of this. Therefore, be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves means be as you are and don't worry, because now you are discerning. Maybe in the earlier stages, the child wasn't as discerning. As the child goes through experiences in life, goes through schools, in business, for example, in relationships, appearances of rejection, etc., they learn from each one of these experiences. They understand themselves. They don't shame and condemn themselves. It goes from For example, let's use my example in the earlier stages. There was nothing wrong with the person saying to me, and I remember some of the experiences in school where the teacher said, don't say that, what I wanted to say. Now, upon discernment, that is not what they really meant. I just interpreted it that way. So what they were saying was, and I can get into the nuances of this, but essentially what was being said was, say it at a particular point where there was an opening for discussion. You see? So there was an opening, there was a space for me to share. I just thought that this means I should not express at all, which is clearly untrue. So be shrewd as serpents, innocent as doves. Now, discerning, I know, okay, it is really helpful and beneficial, and I encourage it. We do it here, we do this, we're facilitating this at the event, is to listen to people, hear about their life experiences, what they're sharing, their viewpoints, listen deeply. And then there's going to naturally be a point where you share. So they don't restrict the flow of communication. You don't restrict the flow of communication. That's certainly not happening here. You feel honored. I feel honored. And it's happening naturally. It's authentic living as a result of, over the course of applying this Matthew 10:16 very practically through discernment and allowing ourselves to be authentically, it is experienced as very precisely what it's talking about here. Therefore, be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves at the same time. It's discerning to be as you are. You're discerning to be more as you are. Now, this also synchronistically relates to the next point. It's so interesting how this all fits together. And you put this page together wonderfully in a flow-based way. So it's interesting how we didn't plan this conversation or the flow of this conversation. And I trust you went about the same approach, very intuitive, flow-based, discerning, allowing yourself to be living this way when you put together this page. So it just so happens to be that the next point is wire in the natural you. So now that we have a greater ability to discern, we know ourselves more and more so, and we continue to know ourselves more and more so, we can authentically allow ourselves to be more so without the fear. How do you relate to that? And how does that relate to wiring the natural you? And what else? We would love to explore anything that shows up for you with respect to wiring in natural you.
Yes. Well, what I'm imagining, taking a kind of an eagle eye view, is for those who are feeling so resonantly drawn to engage in these wonderful conversations with us, whether it's here or listening to the live experience, I find that when we are drawn towards something, it's because on some level it resonates within us as well. And in a sense, we're talking about wiring in the true self, the resonant self, the flow-based self. What we are accommodating, I'm going to use the word accommodating. What we're accommodating is we're accommodating a certain kind of powerful permission slip for a person who may have normally been engaged in certain thought forms, certain beliefs, sometimes for prolonged periods of time, as we discussed. What we are helping accommodate during both the conversation and the live event is naturally, but in real time, a person's able to actually identify the resonance of the true self, not according to thought form per se. Thought may arise, but it's not according to thought form. I find it's actually a harmonic, and that harmonic could be experienced through things such as the emotion of clarity or the emotion of feeling gentle stillness. Some people experience this in meditation or when they are exercising or doing an activity they enjoy, which could be called the creative flow state. But I find when we're wiring in, so to speak, a connection, the remembering rather of the connection to the true self, because I perceive we always have it there, but we may be focused other places. what I am imagining is that through being in the group focused way that we are, and in the case of this event with yourself, with myself, who have both committed to flow in our lives. So we have a very powerful momentum individually and together about how we have individually and then through our experiences connected and have wired our natural self to connect with the actions, the way that we consistently think, behave, and so forth. In that, another person may simply witness this, simply by being in the space, simply by participating. It acts similar to a tuning fork. If you hit a tuning fork that has a similar frequency, even without directly physically touching, one tuning fork of the frequency will resonate and the other will begin to resonate in kind simply through the harmonic if they are of the same tune. And so in this way, as I mentioned the word permission slip, I imagine that through our flow-based way of being, through us embodying that direct connection, that direct wiring, anyone who is choosing to attune will have it almost highlighted internally within themselves as a sense of well-being, as a sense of feeling at ease in the moment. Because regardless of how the external appearance appears for you to be as you are, a I would say a Venn diagram commonality is that a person feels at ease, they feel a sense of trust within that all is going well. They feel a sense of personal empowerment. These are all to me symptoms of giving oneself permission to truly be as one is in the moment, fully and completely. So, this is my experience. I would love to hear your thoughts, feelings on that, and perhaps how you experience this as well.
I agree. I like the tuning forks analogy. This also relates to the next point, which is transform through group focus. So as we are engaging in this conversation right now, I can feel it. It is what I call a flow enhancer. So the way I teach it is make flow a priority. And essentially it's make yourself a priority. Make yourself a priority. And as you do, you automatically appear to make everyone else a priority as well. This is an interesting thing because as you tune, everyone tunes accordingly. And they're tuning to their authentic way of being, their natural way of being. I am tuning into my natural way of being. As I always say, all we truly desire is to be as we are. So if I remain as I am, then you remain as you are. I don't try to force you to be as you are. You don't try to force me. I don't force anyone. You don't force anyone. I simply remain as I am. I remain in my flow. And then what happens is it plays out as people around you also being in flow. And transformation occurs for people around who may not experience this as much. Maybe once in a while they have experienced it. Maybe you're watching this now and you can think of a moment where you were around someone or an event or a group of people where you felt like yourself without doing anything. And then maybe you went into a different environment and didn't feel that way. Now, what I did over the years was I took inventory of that. I asked the question, what is it? Well, what came up for me is two things. Number one is the practice of being as I am, regardless of conditions. That's something that I have gotten better at with practice. I can go into particular environments where before I would relate to them as a flow restrictor. Now I experience them as a flow enhancer. One could say chaotic environments, I don't experience them as chaotic anymore. Entrepreneurship is a great catalyst for this, if anyone is interested. And what I also noticed is it was beneficial to be around communities that were also doing this. So one could say, which one is better? Develop it by yourself or have it experienced as encouragement with a community. What I found from my experience is both were beneficial. Being in a community where there are individuals who choose to be as they are results naturally in you being as you are. Then I found that when I would go into particular environments, again, those environments where I experienced it as chaos, at one point, having been around these individuals who were being as they are, it was easy for me to be as I am in that particular environment. So then I said to myself, I said, oh, okay, there are times where I can practice this in moments of chaos where I don't have people around me that think this way. Maybe I'm by myself. Maybe it just doesn't appear that people are there. Whether they're there or not, it just doesn't appear. What we're talking about here can be practiced. Then, through group facilitation, which is what we're doing, what happens is transformational at an alchemical level. What I mean by that, which then, and very specifically, the transformation at an alchemical level results in our ability to remain in our flow in environments or circumstances which would have been very flow restricting. Even one could even say impossible to find flow in. I've said that a number of times. Impossible to find flow in this area. Yet I was able to do it because of the alchemical change. What I mean by that is physical transformation occurs within. So there is science on the neurotransmitter releases and a whole bunch of benefits of being in flow that actually facilitates physical change in the body. Emotional regulation, shift in thinking. It's all interconnected. Would you agree? All interconnected. Now,
Yes, and
that's why I value both. As you know, and that's part of being in flow, is releasing the dichotomous thinking. It needs to be this way or that way. Actually, what I find is a harmonious ratio. So what we're doing is we're putting together an event where we go in, we remain as we are in our flow. Both you and I make flow a priority. And what we find is transformation naturally happens. And also, everyone who's going to be at the event has that intention as well. So we could say they have the intention to surrender into the flow, their natural way of being. And what happens from that is magic. Well, let me ask you, what have you seen happen from these kinds of events from your experience?
so what I found happens in events, especially when we choose to, for myself, first check into the heart gut and say, is this a resonant, empowered experience for me in the now? Whenever I have heard the yes, and I have gone ahead and followed through with attending or approaching an event, what has happened in my own life is synchronistic experiences that not only happen immediately, and I'll point immediately as within the next week, within the next few months, but oftentimes it triggers a series of synchronicity that will come back sometimes years later, in some cases a decade later. I have experiences, interestingly enough, Joseph, I actually have an experience where there was a event that I went to, it was almost 10 years ago. And it was it was an entrepreneurship event. So it was talking about business, creating businesses, the ways to do things. And I reconnected with the organizer of the event. He's the one that hosted the event. He reached out to me recently because he had found my videos again, and he was so inspired by the videos, and he remembered the time we had spent connecting at the event, that he was sharing the topics I was talking about now really resonated with him at this juncture. So we're going to have a conversation and flow. But what makes this so fascinating to me is that, and this is just one of the connections, is that as I have forged these in-person connections with people who are connected in mutual harmony on a topic, and for the entrepreneurship event, to me that was people who are choosing to create in ways that seem unusual, because in the entrepreneurship community that I was attending, it was about creating life your way through the vehicle of business, which some could say is a flow-based perspective, creating a life your way, connecting with a life your way. So to have that connection a while back, to establish a connection, and without insisting on how that connection, how that relationship must turn out, I find that naturally people come back into my space, like I said, sometimes weeks later, sometimes months later, to connect and create initiatives, to do interviews, to sometimes do projects. Oh, I will give another example. See, this is actually a very good one. I like this one. I know I was just speaking on the current one, but so there was an entrepreneurship event I went to back in 2014 or so. And at the time, I met many different people. It was fun. I was just having fun. I didn't have a specific, I need to try and find a client and do anything. I was just having a good time connecting with
By the way,
everyone.
that's, in my opinion, the best way to go about entrepreneurship and life in general. Just have fun.
Yeah.
That's another way of saying flow of priority. So thank you for making fun a priority.
Oh, well, you're very welcome.
Same
And
to me.
I think myself too. Well, because I found, here's the interesting thing. I found I forged deeper connections because I was being as I am. Instead of approaching the connections I was having from an idea of what could myself or the other get from it, I was simply being so present in the moment that natural inspiration flowed for everyone. And so the interesting thing is because those connections had stood out, I would say, about 4 years later, someone from that I connected with reached back out looking for, and this is what I was doing at the time, looking for a copywriter. And so reached out to me, but we engaged in a conversation from that point to the level where we decided to actually test something more like a JV partnership where I was coming on board and assisting him with building an agency rather than doing a smaller project. And this ended up being my agency partner, who's now one of my dear friends. So we worked together 7 years and we built a multi-million-dollar agency together, which we ran and did many wonderful things. And then even when I completed that cycle and I discovered it would be very fun for me to focus more on conversations like this, we continue to not only be excellent friends, but we continue to work together in harmonious ways when resonant business opportunities or experiences, because I sometimes still do, flow-based business strategy. Now he is one of the people that I can refer people to because he does wonderful work and media buying and data work. So it ends up being a continued harmonious experience, which for me was significant. But when I had met him at the time, there wasn't a sense of, oh, well, this is the person I'm going to do all this stuff with. It was simply because I chose to be naturally who I was, that we were able to connect authentically to the point where it stood out years later. And then in synchronicity, we worked together and built this thing. And so I find that one of the portals you and I have chosen to create here in this experience and event is not only about in the moment, us all connecting with ourselves, but I see it in a sense as a synchronicity incubator where I can imagine, and I'm sure you can imagine as well, that those who feel inspired to come aren't only coming because of the incredible experience we've woven, but I imagine there will be some significant connections that occur within the collaboration, within the space, because everybody is arriving with a mutual perspective of being as they are in flow and synchronicity. How do you feel about that?
Wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing your story. That is a practical example of flow-based prosperity in business. I'm a fan of flow-based prosperity in business, relationships, day-to-day life, all areas of life. In business, at one point, I thought it needs to be a bunch of stress and some flow. That's normal. Then what I found was, well, what if it could be more flow? And practically speaking, like yourself, millions of dollars have been generated in a flow-based way. And then I said, well, I choose to teach flow-based entrepreneurship because I see that it can be something that is the norm. And I would start to actually meet entrepreneurs like yourself who would do the same thing. Many of them. It's interesting how when you know or when you consider that it can be possible, people start to show up to reveal that possibility. So what I had found was it was part of my purpose to teach entrepreneurs to do things in their business, the different initiatives, go about their business in a flow-based way. And so I made it a priority. And as you have been working with me as well, you've seen behind the scenes. You've been a member of Flow-Based Prosperity. You've been a client of mine. We've worked together on a number of initiatives. We speak a lot. We're working on this initiative together. Every aspect of what I do is flow-based. I made it all flow-based. For example, we're sitting in the car making videos. We are having a conversation that we would have anyways, and we're sharing with people. People benefit greatly. We love meeting people. We're going to do an event. We're doing what we naturally love to do, and we go about our operations and everything we do in a flow-based way. So thank you very much for partnering with me to spread this initiative, because I know it's also your initiative as well. That's another thing about the flow-based way. I find that my vision happens to be in harmony with those, as you had mentioned earlier with your example, happens to be in harmony with those individuals that I collaborate with. And also, it happens to be in harmony with their vision. Well, you have access to my communication program. I talk about that in there. I use the Robert Dilts logical levels. I say, my vision is absolutely in harmony with your vision. There's always relatability. It's interconnected. Your vision is in harmony with my vision. Our vision is in harmony with everyone else's vision. And all we do is remain as we are in flow, and we get to witness how so. How do you relate to that?
Yes, very, very well. And I'm feeling so much appreciation and inspiration that you've chosen, as you said, to not only co-create this initiative and experience together, but most importantly, being as we are, embodying the flow, even our experiences of sharing the opportunity of spreading the message of the event and experience are also, as you pointed out, happening in the flow. Because when we each in our own way chose to commit to embodying our way of flow, we get the delight and the opportunity to create and play with reality. So instead of needing to think that we must figure out and force things, we can discern as we're kind of going through the levels we talk to, we can discern what feels like a resonant yes to engage with. And then once we make that choice, we then continue to make the steps with the balance of, oh, perhaps here are some practical initiatives to take, such as having these conversations together. But then as we make those choices, how they appear, we get to play with, such as we're doing it in the car versus maybe taking a walk, such as when we release it versus not. And so instead of needing to attempt to control it through accessing within ourselves, what is experiences of fun and delight? What is playful, like the curious child playful self? Things naturally get done, so to speak, get done in cultivating events, in sharing the message of the event, in coordinating all the elements. And by appearing to play and be as we are, much is still accomplished. As they say, effortless effort. Yes.
Wonderful. So we're going to be facilitating this at the event. Within this video, there's plenty that can be applied. Now, what I find when it comes to working with individuals, it's an individual experience. Facilitate this. I trust you find this to be the case as well. It's very personal. And when doing it in a group dynamic, it respects the harmony of the group and the relatability with each individual in a flow-based way. And that's where you and I also have a lot of fun. Group facilitation. So we get to do this at the event. Now, the result of that is being as we are, or as I say sometimes, being as I am, which is related to our last point. Shift your outdated identity. I get asked the question a lot. How do you shift your identity? I've been referring to the Robert Dilts logical levels for many years. And on the top, we've got vision and then identity. I'll pull it up on the screen. You'll see identity. How do you shift that identity? Well, consider it. I say it this way, and I would like to ask Danielle's view on this is your true identity is love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. These are great pointer words, pointing to the fact that you are whole, complete, have everything, and choose to be as you are. That is not only my true identity, that is your true identity, that is everyone's true identity. It plays out as individual styles of true identity. And so what I find facilitates transformation, facilitates a shift in identity is flow. Now, flow is not only therapeutic, as mentioned, it's mind purifying. It is our natural way of being, childlike way of being. And it is also what I sometimes refer to as living meditation, which we've been discussing over the last few weeks. And nuances were articulated in this conversation, such as listening to intuition, discernment, being still. That results in flow. How do you relate to it, Danielle?
I relate to that very, very well, Joseph. You know, in my experience, being as we are, the true identity, the identity shift, so to speak, is less of attempting to construct something and more about being so aware about the present moment, so aware of not only the thought forms, but the belief systems and that core inner self we talked about, that in through your awareness, you naturally not only identify with who you truly are, the true resonance, as you put it, that one might relate to love, peace, joy, bliss, fulfillment. But you simply become embodied with it in the moment, because without needing, we don't generally need to convince ourselves to live and connect with love, peace, joy, and fulfillment. As we identify the immediate ability to be that, we suddenly are. It's something that appears to happen instantaneously when the perceived path to connecting in that way in the moment is clear. And the thought forms we have about what we might need first before we have that, whether it's through external situations or experiences or perceptions about oneself, when we are able to observe those without shaming or blaming them, without maybe even considering that they need to be any other way than they are, we suddenly arrive at something called presence, something called embracing the totality as it is. And in doing that, the paradox is a great transformation happens because our energy has shifted from attempting to be in action and controlling in a way we thought we must be, to simply resting in its natural state of true self. And therefore, in that moment, you're simply enjoying the experience of existing. And so I would say that part of the shift, part of this portal that we're co-facilitating is someone's ability to connect with, to use that word again, connect with that permission slip, to simply allow all things to be as they are, and then in doing so, have the clarity to be in that present moment, who they truly are, because that's never separate from us. We only sometimes are temporarily distracted by the thought forms or the ideas we have that we may not be aware of what already is.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. Thank you for that. Thank you so much. And then I'll pull up the Robert Dilts logical levels as well, because I relate to it quite often all throughout my program, in my consulting, coaching, throughout the videos. Those layers at the bottom there, the environments, the capabilities, which are skills, the behaviors, they naturally transform and appear to be a mirror reflection of your authentic being, which then you could say skill cultivation, for example, happens in a love-based, happiness-based, peace-based, fulfillment-based way. If, for example, you're learning how to dance or snowboard, it happens that way. Conversations flow that way. Environments. You end up in particular environments that are resonant. Conversations with people, business locations, in authentic ways. That's what I say. I won't put any bias into what it should look like. Let's say when you see it, you'll say, that feels right. That feels authentic. So thank you, Danielle, for joining us today and sharing with us. We appreciate you very much. If you feel resonant with engaging in a conversation with us to encourage more flow in your life, to manifest as flow-based life experiences, flow-based relationships, flow-based career, business, creative expression in a flow-based way. So enjoying the journey as much as you enjoy the destination, because you know how I like to do it. I value the journey and the destination because flow happens on the journey. And then when you get to the destination, you're still in flow. So enjoy the journey and the destination. If you're interested in having more of that kind of experience and also connecting with other like-minded individuals who operate from the heart center, being as I am, being as you are, and have prioritized that to transform all those layers as mentioned with the Robert Dilts logical levels to experience what people ask me for, which is the identity shift, which means be as you are. And then I recommend checking out the link in the description and reserve your seat. And also, if you would like to attend it virtually, we also have a virtual option. And we also have a replay available for you if you're going to be there live, or also if you are going to be there via live stream.
I have such appreciation for not only this conversation we're having, but the incredible flow-based momentum I can sense from this portal experience we're all having in person, across time and space for those who are connecting digitally. And I would simply invite those who are tuning in right now to consider and remember that regardless of what choices you make from here, if you too choose to explore making flow the priority in your life, I imagine you will continue to not only connect to more and more resonant conversations like this, but you will find that you have wings of sorts that bring you right to the experiences, right to the moment that most resonate with your true self. And so thank you, Joseph, for inviting me here, for having this conversation. I have so appreciated you and our friends who are tuning in.
You're welcome, Danielle. Again, the link is in the description for the event. Talk soon.